You are now listening to the EU Startups Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the EU Startups Podcast. As always, I'm your host, David Senden-Garcia, the news editor here at EU Startups. I hope for those of you watching, you'll forgive my rugged look, but I wasn't quite expecting to record the intro today. I had the honor of chatting with Tessa Clarke. She's the CEO and co-founder of food tech platform Olio. Olio was founded in 2015, and its aim is to redistribute unwanted food and household items. So far, it's had over 9 million users and redistributed around 135 million meals. This is equivalent to around 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, this equals to, say, 1 billion car miles or 40 billion liters of water. So you have an idea of the impact of this startup. In our conversation, we chatted about her early beginnings on the dairy farm, as well as Olio's beginnings as a WhatsApp group with the neighbours. We talked about global food sustainability impact and initiatives and how everything's leveling up. Also, how really half of all global food waste comes from the home. So I hope you're looking forward to that conversation. But before that, a quick message from our sponsor, Vanta.
You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority, but to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors, but they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted VCSOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. So whether you're closing your first deal or gearing up for growth, Vanta makes compliance easy. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups, who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/EU startups. That's VANTA.com/EU startups.
Okay, hello Tessa, and welcome to the EU Startups Podcast. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's our pleasure, really. Well, I thought before we got into the questions of everything that we could maybe begin by you giving us sort of a background introduction to yourself and the your company, Olio, and the history of it and how it began.
Fantastic. So to understand Olio, I think you need to understand a little bit about my sort of origin story. So I grew up on a farm in the northeast of the UK. And as a result of that upbringing, I had to work incredibly hard as throughout my childhood. And secondly, I learned as a result of that just how valuable food is. And so grew up with a pretty pathological hatred of food waste and a hatred of waste in general. I didn't think anything sort of in particular about that mindset. I thought that most people felt that way. I then went to Cambridge Uni, Stanford MBA, and had what could be described as a fairly classic corporate career. But the past decade I have spent alongside my co-founder, Sasha, launching and then scaling the Olio app. And Olio is an app that exists to tackle the problem of waste in our homes and local communities. We're really focused on solving the problem of food waste specifically. And how we do that is we connect people with their neighbours so they can give away rather than throw away their spare food and household items. So how it works is you snap a photo, add your item to the Olio app. People living nearby get an alert. They can then browse the listings, request what they want, and pop round and pick it up. And to give you an indication of the scale at which we're operating, we have had just over 9 million people join the Olio community. We've had over 135 million meals worth of food given away via the platform, and we've had 15 million household items given away as well. And a large part of that food redistribution model has come thanks to our 100,000 food safety trained volunteers who collect unsold food from businesses and they redistribute it to the local community via the Olio app.
Okay. Well, it's really a very interesting offering. I don't think we get too many like that through the podcast. So
No, I don't. I don't think there's any other business anywhere in the world
yeah.
like Olio, which on the one hand is brilliant, but on the other hand, it makes it quite challenging because everything is first of a kind,
Mm.
not just kind of the operational model, but the business model as well.
Sure. Well, we'll get later into the interview over kind of the ecosystem and the sector in which you operate. But I have to agree that in the preparation for this interview, I did have kind of a bit of a struggle to say, well, it's hard to even put a comparison to this because,
Yes.
you can talk about food tech, of course, and that's a large sector in itself. But
Yeah.
even then, it's still, Olio still kind of sits on its own, even within that.
Yeah, because we've got that very strong community component
Mm.
as well.
Mm.
So whilst we've got an enormous amount of technology in our product and our proposition, actually in parallel, we've built an incredibly strong sustainability brand,
Mm.
but also a sort of locally rooted community-based brand as well.
Sure. Well, before we get into the offering, I want to ask really because I find the dairy farm story origin it's very endearing and it really kind of paints a great picture to the beginning of Olio, and it makes me think. I was raised in Montana, which is a very agricultural state in the
I've
U.S.
always wanted to go to Montana.
Well,
It's on my bucket list.
you'll probably feel right at home
I will.
considering your
Yeah.
past. But it kind of makes me wonder if there's any kind of habits from the farm life that you've kind of taken with you into the management of a company or even to your personal life. Things like do you wake up at 5 a.m. still just from that kind of background?
So, no, I am not a member of the 5 a.m. club, quite the opposite.
Mm.
But it's really interesting actually, because I spent much of my education and my corporate career really kind of suppressing my farming background because I didn't feel like it was particularly relevant.
Mm.
But now that I have started my entrepreneurial career, I have realized that there's sort of no better grounding for entrepreneurship than growing up on a farm
Mm.
because well, first of all, farming is definitely it's a vocational thing. You are a unique type of person. You're all in on it. It's very consuming, sort of day, night, the concept of work and not work. There's very little differentiation between the two. And that's the same when you're sort of launching your business. Also, in order to thrive on a farm, you have to be just an inveterate problem solver because every single day there are tens, if not hundreds, of problems that happen. And that arises because you're working with animals who do not do what they're supposed to do when you want them to. You've got machinery that is constantly breaking down. And then you have got also all the variables that exist to run that business. So you have very little control over the price at which you sell your product at. It's essentially kind of fluctuates with the commodity markets, which makes it very challenging. You've then got sort of the weather to contend with as well. Very, very hard to manage. So you're constantly confronted with problems, and you've also just then got to, I think, have a glass half full, very, very optimistic, rapid problem solving type mentality. And you've got to think very creatively and laterally. And so, as a child, sort of the cows would break out of a field, and then there was not a perfect solution to rebuild the fence. You would actually have to figure out a way of getting the animals back in when there's only one of you and there's hundreds of them through this hole. We then need to figure out how to fix it with the materials that you have around you. And I think that sort of resourcefulness and that creativity have been really helpful skill sets when launching a business.
Okay. No, I really do like that. And actually, in my research when I was reading into Olio, there was something that really stood out to me was the how there's sometimes the issue with a lot of founders where they have an idea but they don't have a problem. That they have the idea of something they think can work, but they have trouble just isolating what problem they're trying to solve. Whereas with you, and I invite you to tell a story yourself, but the WhatsApp group with the neighbors and giving, and trying to find out what to do with excess food, excess household items, that really paints such a wonderful picture. I'm curious that in that moment when that began and you kind of saw that there was a need, was it immediate that you thought this can be an app or this could be a company? Or did it really just have a small beginning that slowly just evolved into what it is now?
Yeah, so to backtrack to the origin story of Olio, which you've been referring to. So it was just over 10 years ago. I was living in Switzerland, moving back to the UK, and on moving day, the removal men told me I had to throw all of our uneaten food into the bin. And obviously the farmer's daughter and me flat out refused to do that. So instead I bundled up my newborn baby and toddler and I set out into the streets, clutching this food, hoping to find someone to give it to. And I failed miserably. The person who was normally always outside our local supermarket for some reason was not there that day. So I cried that I'd gone to all this effort on such a stressful day, and I knew the removal men were not happy with me. And I went back to the apartment, and when they were in another room, I smuggled the non-perishable food into the bottom of my packing boxes. And that was the moment where I just thought, wow, like Tessa, you really are taking this to crazy extremes. You are resorting to cross-border smuggling. And but how I sort of, I guess, rationalized that was I knew it was someone probably within 100 meters of me who would like that food. The problem is they just didn't know about it. And at that point in time, I had spent over a decade working with digital space. I knew there was an app for everything. So I sort of encountered the problem directly myself. And immediately I thought the solution that I would love to use is an app where I can just advertise that I've got this spare food. And then people living nearby who would like it can request it and pop round and pick it up. And I can remember thinking, well, technically I could post this on Facebook, but I just felt that would be really embarrassing and awkward and weird because there is no norm for sharing food on Facebook groups, and certainly wasn't sort of back then. And so I really felt like I wanted an experience to be able to share it into a community where what I was doing wasn't seen as weird. So I had that experience. I shared the idea of a neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app with my co-founder, Sasha. We then researched the problem of food waste and found that it is truly one of the largest problems facing humanity today. So globally, a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away, worth over $1 trillion. If it were to be a country with the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China, a quarter of humanity's fresh water is used to grow food that's never eaten. And then we've got another 2 billion people joining the planet by 2050. To feed us all, we need to increase global food production by 60%. And today we don't know how we're going to achieve it. And then you look in a country like the UK, and actually half of all food waste takes place in the home. So that was people having experiences similar to what I was having. So we encountered the problem. It was very clear the problem was significant. But what we really wanted to test was that our idea, the idea of sharing this spare food with a neighbour, would work. And the best way we thought of to test that was to run a proof of concept using WhatsApp. And so we had run a market research survey, and then we reached out to 12 people who'd done that market research survey and had told us they hated food waste. They all lived near one another, didn't know each other. And via email, we organized this 2-week experiment and popped those 12 people onto a WhatsApp group. And we said, if anyone's got any spare food, then there might be someone in this group living nearby who might want it. And we launched that on a weekend in April, and we waited with bated breath. It was like absolute cricket. Nothing happened for that weekend. And then on the Monday morning, someone shared half a bag of shallots, and we're like, yes. And that got requested within 23 minutes. And then after that, for the next 2 weeks, we had actually quite a lot of items shared by that WhatsApp group. And then debriefing with those participants afterwards gave us the conviction that, yes, building an app could be a really great solution to this problem. But to your point, I've encountered lots and lots of founders, and I think many founders do make the mistake of falling in love with their idea rather than falling in love with the problem that they're trying to solve. And we've tried to always stay laser focused on the problem that we're trying to solve. And that has resulted in us developing the Olio business in a way that we would never have conceived of. We certainly didn't conceive of when we first founded the business. And the best example of that is that we have developed something that's now called our Food Waste Heroes program. So we have over 100,000 trained volunteers who collect unsold food from local businesses, so supermarkets, office canteens, school and hospital canteens, TV and film production shoots. And those volunteers will collect that unsold food from the business. They'll take it home, they'll add it to the Olio app. Neighbours request it, neighbours will pop around and pick it up. And we ended up sort of developing that model because we needed to find a cost-effective and highly scalable way of, one, getting surplus food onto the app at scale. So we get much more supply onto our marketplace by signing up one supermarket. We'd have to sign up hundreds of houses to get the same amount of supply. But also, just as importantly, it was a really good way for us to monetize, so to generate revenues for our activities. So that was an example of us just staying really focused on kind of solving the problem. How do we make this marketplace work, and not falling in love with our sort of specific idea?
Sure. And from everything you've said, I've had so many questions just kind of pop up during. I wish I could ask them all, but I think the one that kind of is at the top of all of them. As you know, at EU Startups, we cover all kinds of startups from across the European Union and the continent, really that tackle all kinds of challenges. As we were speaking before, Olio is unique in a certain extent to what it offers. From what I could see, there were other offerings, but they tackled the supply chain waste of food. And I want to ask, why do you think it is maybe that it's so much more challenging to tackle the household waste? You said that half of global food waste comes from the household. Why is it harder to tackle that than maybe supply chain?
That is a phenomenally tough nut to crack on so many levels. So first of all, you are building a hyperlocal marketplace, which is always much harder than building a national or global marketplace, right? Because you have to get so many people kind of signed up. You have to have enough early adopters in a small geography. It's a hyperlocal marketplace for a highly perishable item, food, which means that actually you can't just build up a stockpile of supply. Your supply is constantly churning on and off the platform, sort of on a daily basis. You have then got the challenge of customer acquisition costs. So it's, as anyone who runs a direct-to-consumer business knows, it's really expensive. Customer acquisition is expensive, which then puts the onus on having a business model and an ability to monetize those customers. And it turns out it's actually really, really hard to monetize people who are on a platform kind of sharing free food from their homes.
Right.
And then the final thing is, I guess, the sort of the cultural and behavioral piece. You've got to drive behavior change at scale, because at the moment, so households in the UK, for example, are throwing away £17 billion worth of perfectly good food every year. And you have got to sort of persuade those households to do something different, something totally novel and unique, which is to share that food with a stranger instead of throwing it away. So on every level, it's a pretty gnarly problem to be tackling. And we absolutely have not cracked it.
What have you learned from this experience in terms then of motivating people when there isn't a monetary incentive involved?
Yeah. So motivating people without a monetary incentive is actually really easy. So a lot of people assume that you have to kind of pay people to get people to do stuff. And that's just absolute nonsense. People do stuff that makes them feel good. And so a classic example of that would be, we have over 100,000 volunteers. These are members of our community that we've recruited. We've trained on our online food safety management system. And they are every single day collecting and redistributing surplus food from businesses to their local community. And we do not pay those volunteers. They are extremely intrinsically motivated. And they tell us day in, day out how amazing it feels to be sort of doing what they're doing. We also have 50,000 brand ambassadors. So these are people who are spreading the word about Olio in their local community on our behalf, either downloading marketing materials or we will mail it to them, spreading the word on their social networks. And again, we're not paying them to do that. They're doing that because they're passionate about our mission. They want to use Olio. They want to see Olio exist in their world. But what we have found, I think probably our biggest learning around behavior change is that whilst myself and Sasha are incredibly motivated to solve the problem of food waste at scale, we can see its inefficiency. We want to build a marketplace. And we're very motivated by the role that food waste plays in the climate crisis, which is absolutely enormous. So we're really motivated by the environmental impact of food waste. We have learned that most people are not motivated by helping solve the climate crisis, but they are motivated by the social impact, by actually helping to feed people in their local community or rehomes and books, clothes, toys, toiletries, stuff they don't want, but that could really make the day of someone else living nearby. And so we've really pivoted our marketing communications from focusing on the environmental impact to actually focusing on the social impact, and one layer deeper, sort of how it makes you feel. The fact that it feels awesome to share. It gives you this real sort of warm, fuzzy feeling that you've got to experience to understand. But once you've experienced it, there's no going back. And so we, hear from our community all day long that they join Olio because they hate waste. And when they first looked at Olio, they assumed it was an app. But they stay using Olio because they love the community. And that for them is what Olio actually becomes, is not the app, but the community and the doorstep connections. So over 2/3 of our community say they've made friends through Olio, which is just incredibly powerful when we have so many people who are lonelier than ever before. And 3/4 of our community say that sharing has improved their mental health. Again, just a really, really incredible positive social impact that we're having.
Right. So there's a human element, which of course makes up, as much as you're talking about, a huge part of Olio.
Yeah.
And then there's the bigger corporate element. 'Cause I understand you partner with organizations, there's Tesco, Sainsbury's.
Yeah.
So my question there becomes, how hard has it been to shift these kind of large organizations to take, whether it's surplus, whether it's shortages, more seriously than they did before? What is it that makes you able to convince them when before they weren't?
Well, the reality is it's an extremely tough job, again, sort of on a number of fronts. So first of all, we obviously didn't start off sort of pitching into Tesco. First of all, we had to persuade a few enlightened sort of local store owners near where we lived to sort of participate in this and trial this with us. And then we moved up, once we'd sort of proven that model on a super small scale, then we moved up to work with Planet Organic, which was a chain in London that I think at the time had 7 to 10 outlets. We proved it with them. Then the first big well-known brand that we secured was Pret and Compass. And I can remember we sort of rolled out across about 100 locations with them, which was just such a major moment. And then, multiple years later, we finally managed to secure Tesco. And that was the real inflection point for Olio. And that happened during COVID. And over a couple of months, we rolled out our redistribution model with them across almost 3,000 stores. And so that immediately, pretty much overnight, took Olio into almost 3,000 local communities and sort of kickstarted that hyperlocal sharing flywheel. It continues to be challenging to get businesses to sign up. So the large corporates, the multi-year sales cycles, because sadly at the moment, there is no pressure for businesses to solve food waste. There isn't regulatory pressure preventing them from wasting food. There aren't any financial incentives for them to stop wasting food in this country. So we're sort of competing against the bin, and the bin is very cheap. Sometimes the bin is even paying them because of anaerobic digestion subsidies. And everything with the bin is taking place behind closed doors, so no one can really see it. So there's not that much pressure for businesses to take action. Thankfully, there have been businesses such as Tesco who are real market leaders in this and recognize that it is not a viable business model for them to be wasting food at the scale that they are. And others are now starting to follow. Of course, we constantly face the pushback around food safety, and people are concerned about that piece. But we have an incredibly robust food safety management system with a HACCP that sort of sits below that, a retained food safety lawyer. We've been signed off by our primary authority. And last year we redistributed 35 million meals worth of food, and we haven't had any confirmed instances of food poisoning. So, but that does slow down the sales cycle because each client is nervous around that food safety piece. We have to do a lot to prove to them that this is something we take incredibly seriously, and we have all the systems and checks and balances and in place to keep that food redistribution safe.
Sure. This makes me wonder too, because and sorry to keep going to your background, but there's just a lot of nuggets here that I like to tie into. I saw that you have experience in Dyson
Yes.
and kind of large corporates, and that kind of starts. It makes me wonder about that balance of having a purpose-led startup, right? That isn't necessarily corporate by nature, and the mission statement isn't corporate by nature. What was that balance like? Was it easy to then go to these large corporations and talk to them because you had experience in that kind of infrastructure? And was it difficult to kind of make the change in the beginning of Olio to say, I have to change the priorities here?
Yeah, so I do think both Sasha and I founded Olio in our late 30s. We'd both had corporate careers up until that point. And there are a lot of benefits through having worked in the corporate environment before you found a business, because it means that when you go and talk to those corporates, first of all, you have credibility, you're able to use the right language, you understand how they're structured, you understand their challenges and their pressures. And I think you're just that bit more credible to them. So, yes, we have found it very helpful, our previous corporate experience. But of course, the retail industry is a very specific, bespoke industry. So you have to learn sort of the ins and outs of each industry that you are selling into. And we sell across multiple industries. So yes, there's the retail industry, but also we sell into contract caterers,
Mm.
and TV and film production shoots, as I was saying, and venues and stuff like that. So there's definitely been a steep learning curve to understand how to pitch the product right, how to manage sales cycles, how to get the right balance between being ambitious and aggressive in terms of wanting to push things forwards, but also being respectful
Mm.
of the fact that you are working with these enormous organizations that have all their own sort of policy systems and processes, which inevitably take much longer than you would like as an entrepreneur.
Well,
So persistence is the name of the game.
yes. Well, from the outside, it does seem like you have to walk a really kind of tightrope between a societal responsibility, a business that has to be able to survive on its own. There's so many different things that you're kind of juggling at the same time from the very beginning. There's many companies that we talk to that maybe once they're successful, once they've established, then they begin kind of a societal responsibility. Maybe they contribute to a charity, whatever it is. But you start off right from the bat, which I think has its own challenge.
Yeah.
And then if you don't mind me kind of angling the conversation towards the larger sector, I want to quote some figures to you here from our coverage and just see kind of get your perspective on where Olio sits within the ecosystem right now. So from looking at the wider food tech landscape, we've seen different approaches to the same problem as we've been talking about here,
Yeah.
right? There's AI-driven supply chain optimization, B2B wholesale platforms, all different kinds. Taken together, these figures of funding, this is funding amounts, figure for around 7.5 million euros in funding last year, so 2025.
7.5 million or billion?
Million and that's from our coverage. I just want to make that clear. That's from our coverage and from companies that I could poll that I felt wouldn't just be the whole wide food tech sector, but ones that kind of had some kind of comparable angle to yours.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of wondering, where do you think Olio's community powered model kind of fits within everything? Is there an element of outperforming them because it has that unique part there as to maybe other ones have a much more data-led approach?
Yeah. So how I think about it is food waste is $1 trillion global problem. So that is an enormous market opportunity. And because it takes place at every single stage through the supply chain, farm gate, whole, manufacturing, retail, hospitality and leisure, in the home, there it's going to require myriad solutions to solve it. So absolutely, it's going to require AI enablement through the supply chain. It's going to require innovative coatings of products to extend the shelf life. It's B2B marketplaces and what we are doing at Olio. So our approach generally has been, this is such an enormous problem. All of us are trying to get businesses to take this problem seriously and to prioritize it. And so we've always had a very open and collaborative approach with other players in the market. And we have partnered very deeply with the charitable sector in particular. So the largest charitable redistributor of surplus food is an organization called Fair Share, or now they're called Felix Fair Share. So two large charities merged. And we together will also pitch in our proposition to businesses. So we'll say, well, charities can take all the surplus food that they want, and then everything that's left over, our community-based hyperlocal real-time redistribution model will step in and get you to zero edible food waste. And that collaborative approach has really worked, because we've realized that businesses at the moment have been, those that have been trying to tackle food waste have been adopting quite a piecemeal approach. And what we've spent all of last year doing is actually building out what we've called our sort of one-stop shop proposition. So actually we've moved up the waste hierarchy so that we are now, because obviously sustainability is not exactly flavor of the day right now, we have realized that we need to lead with a commercial proposition that helps businesses to sell as much of their surplus food as possible. And so we have a discounting product where we do an integration with retailers, data warehouses, and we then show real time in the Olio app the items within their grocery stores that they have on offer, that they have in the discounting window. And then we drive our community into the store to increase the sell-through rate and also to decrease the amount of operational staff costs that are used taking food through multiple discounting phases. So we've developed that proposition. We've opened up our volunteer management software to, in addition to managing community volunteers, to now manage charity volunteers. So we're helping businesses maximize their commercial value, maximize their social value, and then our heartland is maximizing their environmental value, which is getting them to true zero edible food waste at the end of that.
Okay. So that makes me think about, so you mentioned here that sustainability isn't exactly the flavor of the day. So I'm wondering if you have any insight into how you've seen the market evolve in that kind of area of sustainability. Because in almost every other market, it's just always up. There's always more and more companies doing more and more of the same thing. Is that inverse, do you feel, for startups that kind of focus on sustainable measures?
So I'll just sort of dial back a little bit. And if we think about the food system and the sustainability space, so to date, the vast majority of investment activity has been underwriting the energy transition. And massively underinvested is the equally important food transition that needs to take place to a much more sustainable food system. And again, across the whole entire food system, there has been a sort of chronic underinvestment of the innovation that needs to take place. However, there's been no shortage of startups springing up, solving various sustainability challenges across the food system, because everybody can see quite clearly what needs to happen. As we think about our experience specifically, from kind of 2015 to 2020, we were way ahead of the curve. People were not talking about the climate crisis. They were not really focused on food waste at all. Then in 2020, so the Western world broadly woke up to the fact that climate crisis is real. It's happening now. And corporates staffed up. They hired their chief sustainability officers. They gave them teams. They sometimes gave them seats on the board. And that was a very exciting time for us. Businesses were kind of getting serious about sustainability.
Sure.
Then the war in Ukraine kicked off in February 2022. And then from that moment onwards, there's been a sort of rapid rowing back across many organizations with regards to their sustainability ambitions. And sustainability has been deprioritized relative to other challenges that businesses are dealing with. So that has made the environment in which we're operating more difficult. What's really interesting, though, is that 2026, so far, actually, we're feeling a real kind of step change in energy momentum. And I think partly what's happened is that whilst at the global stage level, all things net zero, ESG are absolutely, they've almost become kind of toxic concepts. What has been happening down the trenches is there's been a bit of a recalibration away from, I guess, a lot of this very reporting, compliance heavy type approach to ESG towards a much more functional and practical type approach. And we're seeing a renewed level of energy and vigor from businesses around solving food waste. Is it as much as we would like? No. But is it starting to feel a lot more energetic than it has over the last couple of years? Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, and I'm coming to my final question here because I don't want to keep you too long. And you'll forgive me for this question because maybe I'm simplifying the problem, but I do think it's something that would be in a lot of people's minds. I think a main question here is, are we actually reducing food waste? Or is it just kind of we feel less guilty about it because we've got all these different initiatives and startups, and there's political ramifications, and there's different laws and regulations being passed. But when you're looking at the numbers, the way I'm sure you are, and everyone with you is there an actual improvement when it comes to food waste?
Not really yet. So as we look sort of globally, the UK is sadly leading the world. So that means that very, very little is happening outside of the UK. I mean, there are small pockets of really innovative, forward-thinking businesses that are taking real action to tackle this. So that is great. But no, collectively, we have not yet made a meaningful dent in that $1 trillion problem. And we absolutely do need to, with a real sense of urgency.
Okay.
Which, it's sort of, for me, it's not an if, it's just a when. The when can't come soon enough. But yeah, we will get there.
That's good. Well, I'm glad we have Olio to help lead the way. Well, thank you very much, Tessa, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Very informative.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tessa. Bye.
Bye.